Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now Eddie Hearn has revealed that Alexander Povetkin vs Dillian Whyte 2 will take place on March 6th, and if he wins, Eddie Hearn wants to make Dillian Whyte vs Deontay Wilder this year. Now March 6th is about 7 to 8 weeks away, so that gives them plenty of time to get ready. I would imagine they have already been in camp. I mean, we've heard that Alexander Povetkin is back training, doing some light things, and that was a couple of weeks ago. So this fight will take place just about 7 or 8 weeks from this date, which is very interesting and very exciting because this was a fight that was supposed to happen at the end of November last year, then perhaps end of January, but there were of course complications with Alexander Povetkin and him testing positive for COVID, so there was no way he could fight in November, and he had a worse bout of it than was first believed, meaning that he was out of the fight for a considerable amount of months because he couldn't train. So now the fight has been moved to this date, and the interesting thing about it is that there are already plans beyond Alexander Povetkin, who is someone they know they cannot overlook, but still, the prospect of a Deontay Wilder fight for Dillian Whyte in 2021, what an incredible year he has set out. And the reason why Deontay Wilder is being mentioned is because Dillian Whyte is in a position currently where he does want to challenge for a world title, but they are planning on making this undisputed fight, meaning there will be no WBC mandatory or no world title opportunity for Dillian Whyte this year. He'll have to wait till next year, so he's going to go Alexander Povetkin and Deontay Wilder instead. Obviously at the moment the Alexander Povetkin fight is the one that is most important because it is standing in his way of becoming once again WBC Interim World Champion. That is a status that will push him towards that world title opportunity, but it doesn't seem like he's going to be getting it this year. So what does Dillian Whyte do? He goes for the next best person, or the next biggest name outside of the champions, aside from himself, which is Deontay Wilder, Andy Ruiz. Those are the kind of fights he's looking at, but it seems to be like he wants a Deontay Wilder, and probably considering the previous between the two of them, that is a better fight than Andy Ruiz, just because of the intrigue. What can happen? What will happen in the build-up to that fight? I mean, Dillian Whyte versus Andy Ruiz is a great fight, but I think that Dillian Whyte versus Deontay Wilder is better again, just because of we don't know what's going to happen, and both of them don't necessarily want to go in there and box, they want to go in there and fight and hurt one another. Now, I guess the big question is, would Deontay Wilder take that fight? Well, that all comes down to his situation with Tyson Fury. If he can get that fight, then obviously he's going to go in that direction. If he does not get the Tyson Fury fight, then he's going to need to do something like this. He's going to need to fight an Alexander Povetkin, a Dillian Whyte, and Andy Ruiz to get back to the top. He cannot expect to get a cheap world title shot once again, because it won't happen. There are too many sharks in the water this time around, so he must fight one of them. Now, Deontay Wilder did explain he does actually want to fight Dillian Whyte. He gave up 5 names of opponents that he will be looking to fight if he doesn't get the Tyson Fury fight, and one of those names was Dillian Whyte. In fact, that was the name he singled out the most as the one he was most intrigued by and the one he wanted the most. And that means that could be a huge showdown towards the end of the year, but the thing is at the moment, Dillian Whyte must deal with Alexander Povetkin. That is not going to be easy, especially considering what happened last time. That will be constantly on Dillian Whyte's mind. Considering the manner in which he lost, he believes that he was in control, which he was winning the fight, but I don't think the golfing class and ability and how the fight was going was as wide as maybe can first be believed, especially considering the commentary. I think that they were maybe admiring Dillian Whyte's work more so than Povetkin's, so that can give you the kind of idea that Dillian Whyte is winning easily. Dillian Whyte was winning in control, then got caught with a lucky punch. That's not what happened. Alexander Povetkin was never going to win the first few rounds. He's the older guy in there with a young, hungry challenger like Dillian Whyte. Same thing happened with Alexander Povetkin in the Michael Hunter fight. He looked out of there in the very first round. But Alexander Povetkin found a way back into the fight and he got a draw with Michael Hunter, which is incredible if you consider how that fight started. Same thing happened with Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte was faster, beating him to the punch. He was landing the better punches and the neater blows early on in the contest, but all it took was one moment of brilliance from Alexander Povetkin. That's what it was. It wasn't one lucky punch, it was one moment that Alexander Povetkin had in the fight, and look what he done with it. Yes, things need to line up, certain things need to fall into place for that punch to land, but it was a punch that Alexander Povetkin works on and it paid off in the fight. Now in the rematch, Dillian Whyte can't go in there thinking, I was ahead, I was beating him, but got caught with a punch I didn't see. It happens in heavyweight boxing. No, I don't think Dillian Whyte will do that anyway. I think he will go about this fight differently compared to the first one, because whatever we might say about the first fight, he didn't win. I know you could say he was in control, he was winning the fight, but he didn't win. It still didn't work. So things need to change in the rematch. I think that Dillian Whyte is definitely good enough and he has all he needs to beat Povetkin. He should be beating Povetkin at this point. If he's going to be world champion, he should be beating Povetkin. But still, that makes it a very tough fight for Dillian Whyte. And what we have to remember is that Alexander Povetkin is a seasoned pro. He's not this guy who went in there with Dillian Whyte, had a big opportunity and upset the odds. There was always a possibility that Alexander Povetkin was going to get the victory. It was a genuine, I'd say 45-55. 55 in the favour of a Dillian Whyte going into this fight. It wasn't a down the middle 50-50. I'd say that Dillian Whyte was definitely the favourite. So in some respects, maybe the result was surprising. Not necessarily an upset, because there was always a possibility that this could happen. And that is what makes Alexander Povetkin dangerous. He always performs. You never see him in a lackluster performance. That is something that Alexander Povetkin brings to the game. That level of consistency, and that is something that Dillian Whyte will have to overcome. Not just a good fighter, not just a fighter who always comes to win, but a fighter also who beat him last time. That will be in the head of Dillian Whyte. So those demons have to be faced on March 6th. And I believe that Dillian Whyte has the mindset in order to cope with that kind of pressure. And he will prove it on March 6th. Then hopefully he goes on to face Deontay Wilder. Now, what a great 2021 for Dillian Whyte. It doesn't matter if he becomes a world champion after that point. He's had some great fights, and he has always taken the toughest fights. And if he fights Povetkin and Deontay Wilder this year, then if he doesn't get a world title shot, then what more can he do? He's done everything asked of him. He's fought the best fighters back to back, so he deserves nothing less than that world title opportunity in 2022. Now, there is some other news, and it is regarding Chris Eubank Jr. Obviously, he has recently joined the Sauerlands, and Kalle Sauerland has named several opponents for Chris Eubank Jr., and they are Murata, Gennady Golovkin, Liam Williams and Kell Brook, although he might have a warm-up first. Yeah, a warm-up first. I mean, does Chris Eubank Jr. need a warm-up? I don't care if he does or not. He's, what, 31, 32, or going on to 32. At this stage, he needs the big fights. He's been inactive for a year. Warm-ups should not be even in the question, given the current point, especially boxing is at. If he can get a big fight, go and take it. You don't know when you are going to be fighting again, so take those big fights. And the thing that sticks out to me the most is it's another fight against someone who he doesn't really need to be fighting. What does he gain from that? And it's not only that, it's not about the miles that can put on the clock being in there with a lower level opposition. It is another training camp that Chris Eubank Jr. has to go through only to fight a lower level opposition, and that will put miles on the clock. Every training camp will, especially considering how he trains for every single fight. He always trains extremely hard for each and every opponent he faces. I don't see why he needs to put himself through a 12-week camp to fight someone that he doesn't gain anything by beating. The fights he should be going into is the Liam Williams fight or the Gennady Golovkin fight. I think that the Murata fight, I mean, it would get him a world title, but it's not really that interesting. And the Kell Brook fight, what is it with that one? Kell Brook is a welterweight. His last fight was against Terence Crawford and he lost in the 4th round. So what's he going to do? Jump up to middleweight then and challenge Eubank for no title and, I mean, a good amount of money, not a lot. So what is the game with that one? Why are they calling out Kell Brook for a fight with Chris Eubank Jr.? That one doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It makes no sense considering he's a welterweight, but it makes even less sense considering he's a welterweight who lost his last fight against Terence Crawford and did ponder retiring after that fight. So that one should be off the table. I don't see how Chris Eubank Jr. versus Kell Brook is an interesting fight. Now, there were some who questioned him moving to Sauerlands from PBC, and they said that he should be with PBC or he should be with Matchroom, considering that is where all the middleweights are. So why not be on that platform when that is where the big fights are? Well, he could go to Matchroom, that is something he could do, and they will get him big fights, but I don't know how good the relationship is between Chris Eubank Jr. and Eddie Hearn at the moment. Doesn't seem to be that good, but I believe that they would still work together. Now, with regards to the PBC, he didn't fight in over a year. He had 2 fights in 2 years. So they were against James DeGale and Korobov. Not a world title opportunity. One big fight, I guess you could say, with James DeGale, but considering how that fight went, wasn't a huge success. Then, who else did he fight? Did he get the big fights? No, he didn't. They still didn't give him those opportunities, so why stay with them? It doesn't make any sense. His career was stagnating, they were just pushing him to the side. He wasn't really important to their plans. You could see that by how they were treating him. So there was no reason for him to stay with PBC, because yes, the big names are on that platform, but he still wasn't getting the fights. So go somewhere else. And I think that joining Sauerland's, he will be working with Matchroom and DAZN anyway. He will get those kind of fights because there is a good relationship with Kalle Sauerland and the Sauerlands in general and Matchroom boxing. So I fully expect Chris Eubank Jr. to be fighting on some Matchroom shows and fighting on DAZN in the US as his US broadcaster. So I believe that he will be working with Eddie Hearn in some respect. He is obviously signed with Sauerlands, but I believe that many of his fights will be made with Matchroom fighters and on Matchroom shows. That could be the way it goes forward for Chris Eubank Jr. If so, then it's a good decision to join at Sauerlands. Maybe still, if he went back with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, because he's been there before, maybe he still wouldn't get the big fights. Maybe their working relationship just doesn't match up. So Sauerlands then working with Eddie Hearn through him, maybe that could work. Sauerlands could be the mediator between Chris Eubank Jr. and Eddie Hearn to finally get some big fights for Chris Eubank Jr. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Pick your favourite subject and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.